Folks, I'm here to talk about our next book. As you may have guessed from my hat, it has to do with Sherlock Holmes. Sherlock Holmes is the most widely recognized fictional character in history. There are so many books and movies about Sherlock Holmes since the death of Conan Doyle. It's unbelievable. I've contributed myself, and now we're going to launch a big one. It's Sherlock Holmes meets Captain Nemo, and they team up to stop a world war. The only reason we're able to do this is because, as most of you know, my crowdfunded books are finished before we start soliciting. We have fulfilled every book on time or ahead of time. This is only possible due to the efforts of two people. One, the artist Richard Bonk, who's brilliant, and two, my showrunner, Chris Brawley, whose site is Bleeding Fool, bleedingfool.com. I urge you to go there. But let's get back to Richard Bonk for a minute. Richard has a long, illustrious career drawing for Image, Marvel, DC. He did the first Private American book. He'll be doing the next Private American book. But when I gave him this script for Sherlock Holmes and Captain Nemo, he exploded. It was like he had been waiting his whole life to draw steampunk. This is far and away his best work. It's going to blow your mind. We're going to launch within the next 2 weeks. I wish I could show you some art now, but you're going to have to wait a little bit. When you do, your jaw's going to hit the floor. I have a long history with Sherlock Holmes. I was a member of the Baker Street Irregulars when I was a kid in Madison, Wisconsin, during high school. And we would meet once a week in a stone cottage in Shorewood to talk about Holmes and his contribution to literature. There's something about the narrative voice that Conan Doyle used, and by that I mean the Victorian narrative voice, which was mostly Dr. Watson speaking. And Watson spoke in a Victorian style, which meant that it was indirect, oblique, fustian, and circumlocucious. And I can think of no phrase that better characterizes the Victorian style than "Good day, sir." I said, "Good day." Now, it's obvious to anyone who hears that the person's saying, "Piss off." But they're much too polite in Victorian England to come out and say that, unless, of course, you're the lower class. Another thing about Victorian England is the class consciousness which permeates everything, especially the Sherlock Holmes novels. Everybody knows their place. The lower classes are always tugging their forelocks. The upper classes are always ordering people around. It never changes, and nobody ever breaks their class rank. Of course, that's long gone. That's in the dustbin of history. But the amazing thing about Sherlock Holmes is he is with us, and he will always be with us. And he is updated for modern times. I'm speaking specifically of the BBC production that starred Benedict Cumberbatch as Sherlock Holmes. It's one of my favorite Holmes. It works brilliantly in the 20th century. No thanks in small part to Cumberbatch. He really gets into the role. But he's not my favorite Sherlock Holmes. My favorite Sherlock Holmes is Jeremy Brett, who starred during the 80s as Sherlock Holmes. And the thing about Brett was he seemed obsessed. And there's no question that Sherlock Holmes was on the spectrum. And by that I mean he suffered from Asperger's syndrome, which interfered with his ability to be intimate with people and also made him unbelievably intense. The only time he came alive was when he was working on a case. And if he wasn't working on a case, he became bored. And to alleviate his boredom, he would do drugs. He'd shoot up cocaine, hence the novel The 7% Solution, which is a good movie, and I recommend it. And there have been so many great actors who played Holmes. My first three are Jeremy Brett, Benedict Cumberbatch, and Basil Rathbone. But many others have played him as well. And if you're not familiar with Sherlock Holmes, you've heard of it. I mean, there's nobody out here that I'm talking to right now who has not heard of Sherlock Holmes. I doubt that there's any adult in this country that has not heard of Sherlock Holmes. But he's worth investigating. There's a reason he endures. There's a reason that Dr. Watson's narratives have such a compelling narrative voice. I urge you to investigate Sherlock Holmes and stand by, because in a little bit, we're going to launch Leviathan. That's the name of the novel in which Sherlock Holmes teams up with Captain Nemo to save the world. Thank you. Oh, yeah. One more thing.
What?
You can find all my books at baroncomics.com.
Okay, very good. And then what would, besides wearing a hat, another tip you would give to your audience?
Well, you may have heard this before, but always take a hat. But seriously, anybody who wants to write or draw, carry a notepad and a pen with you at all times, not a smartphone. Do not try to remember things by entering them into your smartphone. Carry a pen and pad and write them down by hand for a couple of reasons. One is it fixes it in your memory. And two, it's easy to find. You don't have to log through thousands of online entries you may have made over the past year. Keep those notebooks, put dates on them, put dates down when you write something, have it with you always. Good morning, folks. I want to talk about the importance of outlining. This refers to fiction, mostly novels, but to graphic novels as well. When I graduated college, I thought I'd write a fast paperback novel and make a few $100. So I sat down and I started writing. I made it up as I went along. And within a month, I had several thousand words that were complete nonsense, and I threw them out. It took me 30 years to learn how to write a novel, but that's because I'm a slow learner. I have come to believe in the importance of outlining, and I'll tell you my process. First of all, and I've mentioned this before, probably every video I make, is that if you're a creative person, you must carry a pad and a pen with you at all times. You're going to have your phone, but your phone is not a pad and a pen. And the importance of the pad and the pen is when you write something down by hand, you're more likely to remember it. And also, you have that written record right there. It cannot be erased. When I get an idea for a story, and inspiration can come from anywhere, I start by writing down anything and everything that might be related to the story, including names, situations, historical events, or inventions. At some point, and this can take anywhere from a week to months, I reach what I call a critical mass, and that's when I have enough notes, enough idea about the characters that I can see the outlines of the story, and that's when I write the outline. The outline serves two purposes. One is a guide for me, and the other is to excite readers in your project. That is, you're not just writing that outline for yourself. You're writing it for others. You want to be able to hand that outline to anybody and have them read it, and then throw it down and say, wow, where's the story? I got to read that. One of the things that I wrote down in my notepad were modern drug names. And the reason I do this is because they all sound like alien terms, and I've used them in my Nexus comic. Here's 4 drugs whose names I wrote down recently. Syfover, Arexivir, Ingrezza, Satiku. Well, I understand that the president's going to pass a law forbidding drug companies from using X, Y, Z, or Q in any of their drug names, and the drug companies are taking a huge hit about that. Once you have your outline, you begin writing the story, whether it's a graphic novel or a novel, and invariably you will veer away from that outline as you write for a couple of reasons. One is, if you create a character that's fully fleshed out and in whom you believe, and whom readers find appealing or at least interesting, at some point that character is going to turn around and tell you what he's going to do next. The other reason is you're going to research your story if you're any good. If you set a story in the Civil War, you're going to look up the Civil War. You're going to look up specific battles and find out who was involved and what happened there. And that information is going to affect the direction of your story. You should embrace it. The internet is probably the greatest invention for writers since the history of writing, because it allows us access instantly to so much information. I try to write chapters of about 1,500 words in length. Sometimes they go long. I'm writing faster than I ever have before in my life because I enjoy writing more every day. There are a handful of authors who write without outlines. They just sit down and wing it. Elmore Leonard was one of them. Elmore Leonard is one of the most famous pulp writers in history. He wrote so many great stories, and one of them became Justified, the TV series starring Timothy Oliphant. He created the character Raylan Givens. Another book he wrote is called Valdez is Coming, a little-known Western starring Burt Lancaster. It's a little-known masterpiece, and I urge you all to seek it out. My friend Pete Brandvold, the Western writer, writes without an outline. Pete also has a work ethic you cannot match. He writes 3,000 words before noon, come hell or high water, 7 days a year, 7 days a week, unless he's on the road. One of the things about Pete's books is that most Western novels involve vengeance in some form, and vengeance has a predetermined curve, as we all know. We all love revenge stories. He's less reliant on an outline than somebody who's writing a story that lies outside the box. So that's what I've got to say about outlines. I think it's important. Some people don't need it, but most people do. And if you do embrace the outline, it's going to take you places you never dreamed you would go, and you're going to learn a lot more that's going to inform your story. Can't overemphasize it. It's to take a pen and a pad with you at all times, everywhere you go, even if you're not a writer.
Okay, and what would be the reason, or why would you take a pen and
Well, you
pad?
meet a guy on a train and you say, well, you seem like an interesting guy. How do I get in touch with you? And they start to spit out some names or numbers, and you say, here, write it down in this pad. I do this all the time. I was just in Denver for Rocky Mountain Con, and I met a bunch of interesting people, and I asked them to write down their names and email information for me, and now I have them in the notepad.
Okay, great tips. Any upcoming projects that we may want to know about?
We are funding Sherlock Holmes meets Captain Nemo, a.k.a. Leviathan. Go to baroncomics.com and look at the video. It'll blow your mind. It's the greatest work of Richard Bonk's career, and that's really saying something. It's a steampunk explosion. You're going to love it. I just went through the whole script. I'm confident that it falls solidly within the Holmes canon. It sounds like Holmes. It sounds like Conan Doyle. It's got some surprise characters that will thrill you and delight you. I can't name them here. I want them to be discovered as you read the book. All I can say is you get the book, you won't regret it.
And how long is that crowdfunding going to run? When does it end?
We have at least a month to go. We're funding on Fund My Comic, Indiegogo, and Kickstarter.
Right.
Leviathan.
Okay. And Freddie is here. Freddie, do you have something to say
Freddie,
to the audience?
Freddie, do you have something to say to the audience?
Freddie, do you want to look at the audience
Look at this, Freddie.
to see? See, oh.
Freddie has nothing to say.
I was trying to get his attention. Yeah. Okay. Well, we're, so Mike's videographer, which is me, is trying to get back on track. I have been very busy. But anyway, I will get back on the Tuesday videos. That is hopefully the schedule. All right. Thank you for listening, liking, commenting, and more. And we're killing the stupid fruit flies. If you have any ideas how to get rid of fruit flies, they're the bane on our existence right now. All right.
Morning, folks. Today we're going to talk about how to draw the reader into your book. When I write a novel, I strive to have no style at all. And by that, I mean, I don't want the reader to admire the way I put my words together. I want the reader to forget the way I put my words together and tell the story in such a way that the reader believes in the story completely, falls into it, to the exclusion of all other distractions, including the language. Now, there are a lot of writers who don't do this. There are a lot of writers who celebrate the language and use their words as a form of architecture to construct monuments, mostly to themselves, but also to show their mastery of the English language and to expand your vocabulary. Anthony Burgess, who wrote Clockwork Orange, is expert at this. He's a great storyteller. You'll love his books. They're easy to read, but you have to read them with a dictionary at hand because you'll be looking up a new word on virtually every page. Before I get into what to do, I want to tell you what not to do. And this is from a brand new novel that was one of the New York Times 10 best books of the year and a National Book Award finalist. She felt their eyes, all those executioners. "Welcome, young lady," said Mickey Wright, the premier announcer for Chain Gang All-Stars, the crown jewel in the criminal action penal entertainment program. "Why don't you tell us your name?" His high boots were planted in the turf of the battleground, which was long and green, stroked with cocaine white hash marks like a divergent football field. It was Super Bowl weekend, a fact that Wright was contractually obligated to mention between every match that evening. "You know my name." She noticed her own steadiness and felt a dim love for herself. Strange. She'd counted herself wretched for so long, but the crowd seemed to appreciate her boldness. They cheered, though their support was edged with a brutal irony. They looked down on this black woman dressed in the gray jumpsuit of the incarcerated. She was tall and strong, and they looked down on her and the tight coils of black hair on her head. They looked down gleefully. She was about to die. They believed this way. They believed in the sun and the moon and the air they breathed.
Wow.
Well, it's an exciting book, and there are reasons why people like it, but it's a book that's very self-conscious about its language, and you never forget that. You don't quite enter into the story completely because the words are in your way. Another example of a writer who is very self-consciously artsy is Michael Chabon. And I have to say I like his works very much. He wrote The Amazing Adventures of Cavalier and Clay, which is about the birth of the comic book industry, and he wrote a novel called Telegraph Avenue, and I've mentioned this before, because in that novel there's a 5,000-word chapter about a parrot that consists of only one sentence.
Jeez.
A 5,000-word sentence. It does not flag. He's an expert craftsman. You read that sentence all the way through because it's entertaining. One of the things that makes it entertaining is the style. You're enjoying the style. That's not the type of writing I do or that Chuck Dixon does, for example. We're trying to immerse the reader in the story itself without being conscious of the narrative. And here's a couple of hints to make that happen. Number one, the first time your protagonist appears, name him. Don't say, "He woke parched." Say, "John woke parched." Number two, avoid the passive tense. A brown suit was forced upon him. He wore a brown suit. That's what you should say. And there are all sorts of little language fetishes that people embrace that you should avoid. And one is gerunds, because it's the same as using the passive voice. I looked over at John, and he was getting a glass of milk out of the refrigerator. Was getting a glass of milk out. I looked over. John got a glass of milk out of the refrigerator. It's more direct. And anything you can do to reduce the verbiage while not sacrificing a story, you should. The story rules, of course, whatever the story demands. But long sentences filled with clauses and passive tenses get in the reader's way of enjoying the story as an adventure without being conscious of the narrative. There are so many of these gerunds. I mean, Paul was putting the gun away. No, Paul put the gun away. And another secret, and Stephen King says this in his book on writing, which I recommend, is adjectives are not your friend. One adjective here and there is okay. When you add two adjectives, then it gets in the way of the reader's enjoyment. If you choose the right verb, you don't have to layer the sentence with adjectives. He bit down on the chicken sandwich, noting the sharp flavor of cayenne pepper and hot sauce. Instead of saying that, you say he bit down on the chicken sandwich, immediately sweat popped on his forehead.
Yeah.
And that's showing, not telling. Show, don't tell.
May I ask a question?
You may.
Would you like to define gerunds? Gerunds?
A gerund is a word ending in ing that's usually constructed of a verb.
Oh.
Run. Running is a gerund.
Okay.
Eat. Eating is a gerund.
Thank you.
Direct quotes are exceptions to all these guidelines I'm laying down, because direct quotes you use to characterize someone in the book. And if your person is mealy-mouthed, a politician, for example, they're going to wallow in the passive tense. They're going to use gerunds all over the place, and that gives us a glimmer of their character. And my favorite example of politicians using the passive tense is a decision was made.
Oh, yeah.
A decision was made to send that man to jail. A decision was made. But who made the decision? They're trying to hide that.
Right.
That's people who use the passive tense in that manner are usually trying to conceal something. So if you want to write about a politician, remember that they wallow in the passive tense and they use general terms rather than specific terms, such as disinformation. They can't say lie. That would be too abrupt, too direct. He was lying. No, he was spreading disinformation. Watch out for that. And finally, don't torture the language. And this, again, this only applies to the type of story I tell, and I'm thinking specifically of my crime thrillers, Biker, which I'm trying to do in the noir manner, after the example of Richard Stark, for example, or Dashiell Hammett, or Ray Bradbury. Not Ray Bradbury, Raymond Chandler. They knew each other, by the way, but Raymond Chandler's use of language is an exception. Because one of the things that made his writing memorable were turns of phrases that were cheeky and drew your attention and were witty. And the one that always comes to mind is he was about as inconspicuous as a tarantula on angel food cake. So that's it. That's it. My advice to you, if you're writing an adventure story or a thriller or a mystery writer, try to make your language disappear into the story so that the reader is only conscious of the story itself and not the words that he's reading.
Sorry, I was distracted because Freddie, I think, is chewing on something he wasn't supposed to. So I was trying to figure out if I needed to scour his mouth out and get that out of his mouth.
Well, next time we'll just close in on Freddie and we'll ask him about it.
Well, I'm hoping he's not chewing on something he's not supposed to. Anyway, back to Mike. All right, any other tips?
You see the hat.
Yes.
Follow my example.
Well, hey, Freddie's going to get in on the action, do a little bit of a little wide angle. All right. Well, great. Another great video. Mike's videographer took a little vacation, so that's why you didn't see any YouTube uploads for a couple of weeks. And appreciate everyone watching, liking, commenting. If there's anything new you would like to see, well, not new. Okay, what am I trying to say? Topics. Any topics you'd like to hear about?
Send them to me. I'm on Twitter at Bloody Red Baron. And you can always reach me through my Facebook page, The Comics and Novels of Mike Baron.
Yeah, and you may comment on this YouTube channel, Jim. All right, thank you for watching, everyone. Bye-bye.
A lot of people want to write novels, and a lot of people do. They want to write novels in the worst possible way, and a lot of people do. You know, 1 million novels are published in the United States every year. That's the official number. But a lot of them are self-published or published on small university presses and don't get much circulation. Many of the novels that are self-published, most of them fail because the writer doesn't know how to write. Even if you write a good novel, there's no guarantee you're going to be a success. I could name you a couple of writers that I love, that I think write some of the most compelling stories I've ever read, and yet they've never hit it big. And for example, one is Chuck Logan, the Vietnam veteran who lives in Minneapolis, who's written a series of novels featuring his Vietnam veteran, Phil Broker, who becomes a detective. Chuck hit it big when Sylvester Stallone bought the rights to Homefront, which is about his character Broker in Minnesota fighting with a liberal school administration and others. Unfortunately, for financial reasons, Sly relocated the story to the Deep South and cast Jason Statham in the lead role. Now, anybody who likes Jason Statham knows that he only plays Jason Statham, and every part he plays has a British accent. And I can't wait to see how that plays out when he does Levon Cade, Chuck Dixon's immortal character, who also comes from the Deep South. But let's get back to how to start a novel. A lot of people make the rookie mistake of introducing their protagonist with pronouns like he woke gasping. Never do that. Never do that. You name your character the first time he appears. John woke gasping. Another trick to starting a novel, and this is something you cannot go wrong with, is to set the physical setting. And an example of that is it was 80 degrees on the High Plains Desert at 8 a.m. By the time they reached noon, it would be in the hundreds. The adobe bar sat on the dirt road. The lights were not on, but a car in the parking lot indicated that someone was inside. The hut had been built 100 years previously and renovated countless times. That's just an example off the top of my head. So there's two things that are very important for you to learn if you're writing your own novel. One is, do not introduce your character with pronouns. Name them the first chance you get. And two, you can't go wrong by setting the stage with a description of the physical area where it takes place.
All right. Those are very good, short and sweet. Any other thoughts for today, Thursday, March 21st?
Well, I've always encouraged everyone to always take a hat. I try to follow my own example.
Yes, you wear a hat a lot.
Yes, I do wear a hat.
And I even had cut your hair. Do you want to show the people how the lovely little haircut? See, look. Not a professional, but it's okay. It's what you get. You get what you pay for.
It works.
It works.
Anne is available to cut your hair for a modest fee.
Yeah, right. Mike and Freddie.
Good morning, folks. Every day I get letters from people who say, will you look at my comic? Will you look at my novel? And I always say, what is your story about? If you are working on a piece of fiction, it's vital that you figure this out ahead of time and make a prepared statement. You can't wing it. The blurb about what your story is about has several purposes. One is to guide you. It's sort of a mini outline. And I have to tell you that I do elaborate outlines, and I know a lot of authors who do elaborate outlines, and in every case, when they're writing the book or the comic, at some point they veer away from the outline because their research or the character they created starts dictating which way the story will go. Don't worry about that. The purpose of what is your story about is not just to guide you, but it's to excite interest in the story. You have to keep this in the forefront of your mind when you write this. You want somebody to read what your story is about and say, holy shit, I got to read this now. And there's no better example of what is your story about than the blurbs on paperback novels of the 70s and 80s. There are some stories, a lot of books are coming out with what is your story about today, but that was the heyday of the great blurb, and all you have to do is look at the back of the paperbacks to read what's the story about. Now, I grabbed 4 books here randomly off my shelves by authors whom I admire, because in each case they describe the book with the intent of enticing readers. And the first one is Hopscotch by Brian Garfield. Many of you know him as a great pulp writer who wrote Death Wish that was turned into a movie starring Charles Bronson. This is Hopscotch. Since being forced into retirement by the CIA, Miles Kendig had tried everything in an effort to satisfy his hunger for excitement. But he could not recreate the ultimate conflict of life or death with no rules, the experience of pitting himself against the enemy with no holds barred. Despite his bitterness of being shelved by the CIA, Miles was still scrupulously American. So when he found himself tempted by an offer from the Russians, he realized the time had come for him to put up or give up. He formulated a plan. By threatening to expose the espionage secrets of the major powers, he set himself up as the quarry of an international manhunt. Now there was no choice. He would either prove to himself that after 25 years of playing the game, he was still a winner, or he would meet his death at the hands of younger men. Well, that certainly caused me to pick it up. Now, the second one is Lie Catchers by Paul Bishop. Now, I've met Paul. He was a detective for 30 years with the Los Angeles Police Department, so he knows his stuff. With her special abilities, top LAPD robbery homicide detective Calamity Jane Randall thought she knew all about interrogation until she met Detective Ray Pagan. Wielding a suspect's vocal intonations, emotions, and physical gestures like a scalpel, Pagan's empathetic lie-catching abilities are legendary. Both detectives are scarred by past tragedies, but when paired together, they threaten to tear the city apart, searching for a duo of missing children. The search where the right answer to the wrong question can mean sudden death. Ripped from the experiences of 35-year veteran LAPD detective and nationally recognized interrogator Paul Bishop, Lie Catchers takes the reader inside the dark and dangerous mind games of the men and women for whom truth is an obsession. Third is Joe Gore's Glass Tiger. Now, Joe Gore's was an interesting author. He was enamored of Dashiell Hammett, who was the creator of Sam Spade, among many other great fictions. And Dashiell Hammett worked as a private investigator for the Pinkerton Agency before he turned to fiction. Joe Gore's did the same thing. Joe Gore's was a private investigator before he started writing books, one of which is Hammett, which is his pain to the great author. It was made into a movie, and it's a very good movie if you could seek it out. But Glass Tiger is different. Brendan Thorne, ex-ranger in Panama, ex-sniper for a CIA front in Colombia, has forsworn violence and is living in Kenya when FBI agent Terrell Hatfield arranges for Thorne's deportation back to the United States. In a top-secret meeting, Thorne is told that Halden Corwin, legendary Vietnam sniper and mercenary, has vowed to assassinate the recently elected President of the United States. The government's computers have picked Thorne as the most likely person to find Corwin and stop him. Thorne won't have to kill anyone. Hatfield's crack FBI team will take care of that, but when the plan doesn't go as described, Thorne discovers he can't trust anyone or anything he's been told. Drawn into a web of lies and full of stunning revelations, Glass Tiger will leave the reader breathless. That certainly interested me. A side note here is several of these books feature ex-CIA snipers. In fact, every other movie today features an ex-CIA sniper. The beekeeper, the painter, the bricklayer, nobody. The list goes on and on. But enough about ex-CIA snipers. They're everywhere. You can't swing a dead cat up here without hitting an ex-CIA sniper. One more. Confederacy of Fear by Blaine Pardoe. A determined general, a rogue operative, a political refugee, and an embittered family rise up against the enemies of the land they call home. The war for the soul of the former United States rages from coast to coast in this explosive conservative political thriller. Well, that's short and sweet. Doesn't give you that much. But I think you get the idea. Now, what makes it successful, what is your story about, is you name your protagonist. You just don't say a man. And you give them just a tiny bit of characterization. And in these books I just discussed, we see that some of them are retired assassins, which tells you a great deal about their background. And you give them a format or milieu which is inherently fascinating. And you give enough facts that the reader has something to hang his hat on. You can't be vague. You want to mention who they are, where they are, and what they're trying to do. It's these little facts that entice the reader and make your story unique. Now, you don't want to go overboard, but you don't want to just start with, after being struck by lightning, a man discovers he has super speed and strength. No, you don't want to do that. And often people who are working in comics, the first thing they do is list their character's powers. Well, really, that should not be the first thing you do. The first thing you do is you create a fascinating character, and you give them a mission or a situation, and let the powers rise organically from their mission or their situation. For instance, a visitor to another planet, you've already got half the battle won, because who knows what he's going to find there, and the laws of physics might be different there, as they were for John Carter of Mars. When Edgar Rice Burroughs created John Carter of Mars, he stumbled across a brilliant conceit, which was that Mars is a smaller planet than Earth, and the gravity is less, and that if a human were to survive there, they would find themselves infinitely stronger and faster than any natives. That's one way to do it. So, folks, I urge you to work on what your story is about ahead of time. Work it out so that you're happy, you're proud of it. You want people to read it, because the whole purpose of that, aside from guiding the author, is to get people to read the book.